I'm Kathy with a C.
And I'm Kathy with a K.
And this is Killer Destinations. So as many of you realize, last week we had to do a repeat episode, and Kathy posted about it. And it's because my younger brother, Matt, had a very serious and unexpected aortic dissection, which anyone out there who knows about aortic dissections understands how serious they are. And he's been in the hospital for a couple weeks, and the doctors are telling us he has a very long road ahead. I personally am still praying for a radical miracle, but any of you out there who are praying people, please keep my brother Matt in your prayers. Prayers of healing and acceptance would be greatly appreciated.
In the years following Charles Lindbergh's historic nonstop flight across the Atlantic, he and his wife moved to a beautiful 390-acre estate to escape the constant glare of the media spotlight. It was not to be. In 1932, a crime took place that stunned the nation and dragged this grieving family through hell and back in to the international spotlight.
Today's destination is East Amwell Township, New Jersey. East Amwell Township is located in Hunterdon County on the state's western border with Pennsylvania. The original Amwell Township was established by a royal patent from Queen Anne in 1708. The township was named after townships in Herefordshire, England. East Amwell Township and West Amwell Township were formed on April 6, 1846, when Amwell Township was split in two. Its history was intertwined with early land ownership and the region's farming traditions, and East Amwell evolved into its own entity with a rich agricultural heritage characterized by farms and rural life, and it preserved a unique quality of life amidst New Jersey's development. But in 1932, the quiet country environment was shattered when an infant was stolen from his home in the dark of night. His famous parents had chosen to build their estate in this rural landscape to enjoy privacy. But suddenly, the eyes of the world were intently focused on their every move.
It was a windy, cold night in early March 1932 when the terrified screams of a woman cut through the darkness. Nurse Betty Gow had gone to the bedroom of 20-month-old Charles Jr. He was sleeping in his nursery on the second floor of the house. She had put him to bed at 8 o'clock, but when the nurse went to check on Charles Jr. just a couple of hours later, Kath, he wasn't in his crib. So Nurse Betty runs downstairs to tell his parents, Charles Lindbergh, and his wife, Anne. She was hoping they'd gone up to get their son and taken him downstairs, but he wasn't there either. So they followed the nurse up to the second floor, Charles Jr.'s bedroom, to see what could have happened. And Kath, when they walked into the room, the first thing they saw was an envelope on the windowsill. Charles opened it, and inside was a ransom note. Their baby boy had been kidnapped. The note demanded $50,000, which I know everybody's wondering, what is that in 2026 dollars? And it's 1.1 mil. So, of course, the first thing they did was they called the local police, who in turn called the state police. And Kath, the reason they elevated this so quickly was, one, East Amwell Township obviously was a very small place, but also it was the stature of the parents. Charles Jr.'s parents, as we said, were Charles Lindbergh, who was 30 years old, and his 25-year-old wife, Anne Morrow Lindbergh. Charles Jr. Kath was actually born on his mom's birthday. But even though the parents' names, Charles and Anne Lindbergh, may not resonate today like it used to, you need to think of like the Beatles and Elvis and all that pandemonium, roll it all together. They were that and a bag of chips.
Right.
Like they were, especially Charles Lindbergh was a huge, huge international hero. He was a celebrated aviator. And what had happened is in 1927, he had taken a plane that was actually sponsored by Pan Am, which used to be the airline.
Yeah.
And he was the very first person to go from the United States 5,000 miles away to Paris, France in one go.
Yep.
Now, nowadays that sounds easy. Like you and I could build a plane and do it.
Just exactly what I was thinking.
And we're going to do that tomorrow. But it opened up everything. It opened up air travel, sure, but it also opened up commerce.
Mm-hmm.
It had never been done before. So when he returned back to the United States, he was hailed as a hero.
Yeah.
There were ticker tape parades, which, look it up if you don't know what that is. When was the last time they did them?
I don't even know.
80s maybe?
I don't know.
But anyways.
He went from New York to Paris, I believe, right?
Yes.
His flight. Okay. And so he gets to Paris and people are going nuts.
Right.
You know, and so when he returned home, he went to dozens and dozens of cities. I think over 80 cities, sort of on this goodwill tour where he would just pop over on his little plane, the Spirit of St. Louis, and, you know, visit everybody to all these parades.
And allow them to be like, you're wonderful. Yay. Here's a plaque. Here's some food.
Right. So after his goodwill tour in the United States, Lindbergh continued through Central America and arrived in Mexico City in his airplane in December of 1927. So he starts a tour of Mexico City after having been invited by Dwight Morrow, who was the American ambassador in Mexico at the time. So over 150,000 residents show up for his arrival. He's a big deal. No, it's
pandemonium.
Total pandemonium. Anyway, so there he met Anne Spencer Morrow, his future wife, who was then 21 years old. And she was the daughter of the U.S. ambassador that invited him. And so it took Charles 9 months before he asked Anne on a date.
Playing hard to get.
Exactly. And they were only engaged a few months later. So the two were married in May of 1929 in her parents' backyard in New Jersey with only 20 guests in attendance. So a very, very low-key wedding.
Which is crazy because of the international fame he had, that they were able to keep it quiet and there were only 20 of them.
Yeah. Yeah. But of course it's 1920. What year did the stock market crashed in 29, but do you know what month it crashed?
I believe it was October.
Okay, so this is just
Wasn't it October?
I don't remember. Google it really quick. I'm just curious.
Okay, it was end of October. So I was right about October. And it was October 24th to 29th, the 29th being Black Tuesday in 1929.
Okay, so that's 5 months after they get married. But originally when I read this, I thought perhaps they had a small wedding. Yeah, no, not that they caused the crash, but they had a small wedding that, like, as a result of the stock market tanking. I don't know. That's just me making things up. So after getting married, Charles and Anne moved into their home in rural East Amwell Township, New Jersey. So the property, they named it Highfields, Kath, and it was 390 acres, and it was remote, basically like perfect for a celebrity couple trying to hide from the limelight. So it was chosen because it was so private, but also it had a private airstrip. So while they were dating, and I thought this was very interesting, Charles taught Anne how to fly and act as a radio operator. So following their marriage, before they had children, the two of them conducted survey flights and were able to map viable paths across the Atlantic and the Pacific, opening up new routes for commercial airlines. Now, this is crazy.
She's studly.
This is like, I know.
But she was incredibly intelligent. She was a Smith College graduate. And she was actually, and Kathy and I, not that this helps with her career, but she was beautiful in a very like, you know, when you see wealthy women of the age, how they're all glitzed and glammed and all that stuff. She just looked like the girl next door.
Like a simple beauty.
That was exactly it. And I love the fact that she was like, okay, if my guy likes flying, I better like it too.
I know. I can't, like, to me, that's like something you do before you have kids, like they did.
Right.
Because once you have a child, it's like, well, wait a second. Our ticket can't both be up at the same time. Somebody has to stay and take care of Junior.
Or you put Junior in the back and y'all go.
Oh, that's true.
But it's true.
That's an option.
Okay, back to the kidnapping.
How do you do that? There you go. Fast forward.
As soon as police arrived at the scene, of course, they conducted a search of the premises. And Kath, they found traces of mud in the nursery, and there was mud beneath the nursery window on the outside of the house. So obviously that's where they knew it came from. There was a ladder that was there as well, that it looked like it had broken in half, and it was made of wood, and it looked like it had been homemade. But at the base of the ladder, because it was muddy, it was all slippery and slidey. And so they were, what the police report said.
That's the technical term.
If you need me to explain it, let me know. But because of that, they weren't able to actually get a good footprint off of it. So they didn't know what like type of sole it was or what size it was, any of that kind of stuff. There were no bloodstains and no fingerprints that didn't belong to the Lindberghs or Nurse Betty. So they also questioned their household staff, so Nurse Betty, the maid, the butler, the chef, all of that, and then anybody who worked on their property to see, one, if they were involved, of course, but also had they seen anything strange that had happened? Had they noticed anybody lurking around who shouldn't have been there and all of that? Unfortunately, they didn't get anything to go on. Now, according to the FBI files, Kath, the ransom note said, "Dear sir, have $50,000 ready. $25,000 in $20 bills, $15,000 in $10 bills, and $10,000 in $5 bills. After 2 to 4 days, we will inform you where to deliver the money. We will warn you from making anything public or for notifying the police. The child is in good care. Indication for all letters are signature and 3 holes." Now, really quickly, this letter, a gazillion typos. The $, instead of being at the front of the numbers, was always at the end. And the last part where it says indication for all letters are signature and 3 holes, basically in the bottom corner of this ransom note, there were 2 interlocking blue circles with the interior of the overlap colored red, and it had 3 holes poked in it. And basically what this was saying was, you will know any future ransom notes are from me because this is my signature. This is what to look for to know it's real. But of course, as soon as the FBI were called, word of the kidnapping got out and it was broadcast over the entire world by the next morning. So the reporters, the cameramen, the looky-loos, all these folks just swarmed all over the Lindbergh property, trampling any potential evidence that may have still been there. Because they'd never had anything like this happen before. So the chief of the New Jersey State Police, who was in charge of the investigation, this is super interesting and I was so glad I looked it up. The chief of the police was Colonel H. Norman Schwarzkopf. Does that sound familiar to you?
Of course.
So I was like, they have to be related.
Right.
And they were. So anybody who's old enough to remember the first Gulf War, this Colonel Schwarzkopf was the father of General Norman Schwarzkopf, Stormin' Norman as he was called.
Stormin' Norman.
Who was the commander of Desert Storm in the early 1990s. That's crazy.
That is crazy.
And he's like 12 feet taller than his dad, which I thought was funny.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Or he was, I guess.
Yeah, because Schwarzkopf was big.
Huge.
Yeah.
And his dad was a wee little fellow.
A wee little fellow.
Probably not that little, but... And they're German, clearly. Do you know what Schwarzkopf means in German?
I think it means good cookie eating.
It means blackhead.
What? Are you lying?
Schwarz is black. Kopf is head.
Oh my God.
It's probably referring to the color of their hair. I know.
Yeah.
But in these days...
That is so funny.
I know. The tidbits I get out there for you guys. You're welcome. So anyways.
Maybe I'm hungry. Anyway.
I think you are. Do you want to read about Papa Schwarzkopf?
Yeah, so Papa Schwarzkopf suspected gang involvement, as kidnapping was a common criminal enterprise during the Great Depression, but big famous people didn't get their babies kidnapped. And so he wanted members of his team to basically reach out to the underworld, any mafia people, etc., etc. But Charles Lindbergh made it very clear to Papa Schwarzkopf that he wanted no police interference in the negotiations between his family and the kidnappers.
And basically, he told Papa Schwarzkopf, I'm in charge.
Right.
You go be pretty. You go sit down, have tea.
And I'm sure Papa Schwarzkopf was like, okay, call me if you need me.
Exactly.
Yeah, call me if you need me. So what the Lindberghs did was quickly broadcast a radio message to the kidnappers and promised to keep all arrangements made for the safe return of their baby confidential. Basically, they were like, we don't care about the money. We just want Charles Jr. back. So 3 days after the kidnapping, the Lindberghs received an envelope in the mail that was postmarked from Brooklyn, New York. Now, it was a handwritten note from the kidnapper that warned the Lindberghs to keep the police out of this case, which they had already broadcast that they would do. And the note further added, don't be afraid about the baby. 2 ladies keeping care of it day and night. So over the next month, there were almost a dozen ransom notes that followed the very first one. And all of these notes were confirmed as being from the kidnapper because they had that same design with the hole punch.
Which was actually really smart because, as we said, it had gotten out to the world. And you have all of those people now who are going to take advantage of it. And so they were already getting notes from people saying, I'm the one who kidnapped the baby.
Right.
I'm the blah, blah, blah.
Right.
So
all sorts of pranksters stepped up.
Yeah.
But because of this very unique hole punch signature that was not given to the media, they knew exactly what letters were real.
So we're not going to get into details of all the notes because obviously we don't want to do that long a podcast unless you guys have a couple days.
Right, exactly.
But basically, one of the notes increased the ransom amount from $50,000 to $70,000. And then the ones that followed that basically were dealing with the amount of money in the exchange. So, Kath, what was interesting is that it was about a week after Charles Jr. was kidnapped, and the note received at the Lindbergh house stated that they would not accept an intermediary who was a friend or relative of the Lindbergh family. And so here's what happened, Kath. Back then, they weren't using telephones to communicate all the time. They weren't using emails, obviously, any of that sort of stuff. So what the kidnapper said in this note was, I want an intermediary who you don't know to be the one I work with. So somebody needs to place an ad in the newspaper with contact information. So that will now be the person who I get in touch with.
And so the Lindberghs were receiving letters directly from the kidnappers.
Correct.
Okay, but were the kidnappers publishing anything in the newspaper?
Not yet.
Okay.
But they specifically said it needed to be in the Bronx Home News. So it was one specific newspaper. This is where the kidnappers wanted the contact information for the intermediary to be. So on that same date, unbeknownst to the Lindberghs, a retired school principal named Dr. John Condon published an ad in which he said, I'm willing to act as the go-between. I don't know the Lindberghs. But instead of using his name in the ad, Kath, he actually gave himself the nickname Jafsy, because obviously he doesn't want his name out there, but it was based on his initials JFC. So he was now Jafsy.
So when this guy published his ad offering to be the intermediary, the Lindberghs had not yet published their ad. So it was a complete fluke that this guy came forward offering to be the intermediary.
Correct. Which of course made the police go, huh?
Yeah.
What's going on?
Who are you?
Right. Are you really working for the kidnapper? Are you, just trying to make problems, whatever? But he wasn't. He was a retired school principal. He had heard about the kidnapping. He knew that there were notes going back and forth because, of course, the newspapers were publishing 12 articles a day about it.
Right.
And he was like, maybe I can help. I'm trustworthy. I'm, a very no nonsense kind of fellow. He was a principal back in the day, right? And he was retired. So he wasn't some big strong man that was going to overpower the kidnapper.
Right.
So anyways, the next day, Dr. Condon actually received a letter from the kidnapper sent to his apartment, and it directed him, after you get the money from Mr. Lindbergh, put these words in the New York American newspaper. So we're now switching newspapers. The words were supposed to be, money is ready. After we see that, we'll give you further instructions.
I can't imagine the frenzy that the news media were able to do on this.
I know.
I like the amount of papers that were probably sold, it would be unbelievable.
After seeing this note in the American newspaper say when money is ready and whatnot, of course, Dr. Condon had to reach out to Lindbergh to say, show me the money. So the two of them met and they got the money together, $70,000 in cash, 1.6 mil, and they met to discuss what their actual response was going to be. And it was during this meeting, actually, that Charles Lindbergh said, you can now place a note in the New York American newspaper as the kidnapper instructed. And so basically that's what he did. He was given $70,000 cash and then started negotiations for payment through these newspaper ads. 2 days after Dr. Condon posted an ad that he had the money, he received an anonymous phone call around 8:30 in the evening. The caller said, someone's going to be knocking at your door with further instructions. And shortly after that, a man knocked on his door. Dr. Condon answered it, and it was a cab driver. He said, a stranger gave me a letter to deliver to your address. This was also a ransom note. It said that Dr. Condon had 45 minutes to get to a specific location about 100 feet from an outlying subway station. So he said, you got to get on the subway, go to this stop. Once you get off, leave it. About 100 feet away, you'll see a stone near an empty hot dog stand with further instructions.
That's crazy.
Totally crazy. But sure enough, he followed exactly what the instructions said. He goes and finds the stone. Under the stone, the note just says, go to Woodlawn Cemetery, which was nearby. And Kath, I looked it up. This is actually a famous cemetery in the Bronx. And so not only is it famous for its architecture, but it also has a ton of famous people who had been laid to rest there, even in 1932. And so by 1932, these people included author Herman Melville, U.S. Marshal Bat Masterson, and suffragette Elizabeth Stanton. Anyways, so Dr. Condon is standing at Woodlawn Cemetery, waiting, probably nervous as heck, to find out what's next. And Kath, he looks up and he sees a man walking toward him with a handkerchief over his nose and mouth. The man stops and motions for Dr. Condon to come toward him. Good for him. I would have been a blur.
I would have been like, I gotta go. I changed my mind.
Exactly. Is there a bathroom?
Yeah.
But Dr. Condon, made of stronger stuff than we are, approached the man and said the man spoke with a very heavy German accent and told Dr. Condon that his name was John. But here's what happened, Kath. Dr. Condon did not take the money with him on this meet because they had no proof of life. So when he met with John, Dr. Condon said, hey, if you can provide us proof, we'll bring you the cash. They want their son back. But until you do that, I can't give you the money. And Kathy, what was also interesting is that Lindbergh actually provided a bodyguard for Dr. Condon because he was doing all these things on behalf of the family and he didn't want him to get hurt if something happened to him while he was acting as their intermediary. But the bodyguard wasn't with him in the cemetery because it was too open.
And also, he was only given 45 minutes to go to the first location.
True.
That's
a good point.
That's not a lot of time when you got to get on the subway.
Exactly. So anyways, during the next few days, Dr. Condon kept repeating his advertisements, urging further contact, stating again, the Lindberghs are going to pay the ransom. They just need proof of life for baby Charles. It took 4 days, but just over 2 weeks after Charles Jr. was kidnapped, a package containing the gray wool sleeping suit that was worn by Charles Jr. on the night of the kidnapping was delivered to Dr. Condon. He took it over to the Lindbergh's house, and Charles and Anne were able to confirm that it in fact belonged to their son.
So now the Lindberghs have proof that the person that they're actually dealing with had some kind of contact with their son, even though it wasn't technically proof of life. So a few days later, Dr. Condon received another note demanding the money be ready when the kidnapper asked for it. So, Kath, here's what's interesting. So U.S. Treasury agents assisted in assembling the ransom money. And as you said previously, they had cash. They initially had cash, but then later realized, like, wait a second, maybe this isn't the way to go. Let's give some in cash and some in gold certificates, because the gold certificates each had serial numbers. Because what they actually represented, Kath, was gold coins held by the U.S. Treasury, like when we used to adhere to the gold standard. And so
you didn't have to have a bunch of gold coins in your pocket. You could have just a check.
Correct. And so it kind of looked like a check, and it was like a cashier's check. It was akin to a traveler's check. You could buy things with it, but each of them had serial numbers. And so what the Treasury Department did when they compiled these gold certificates was they recorded each of the serial numbers on each of the gold certificates, which I think were right around $20 in value.
It varied from 20 to 100.
Okay. That they assembled for the kidnapper.
Correct.
Okay. And they also took samples of the string and the paper used to tie the bundled money.
So smart.
I know. And so essentially they realized these gold certificates would be more easily traced once the kidnapper started spending them. So about a month after the kidnapping, the gold certificates and the cash were delivered to Dr. Condon's house. And at 7:45 p.m. on Saturday, April 4th, 1932, another taxi driver arrived with another note directing Dr. Condon to a flower shop. Dr. Condon was instructed to look under a table at the flower shop. When he got to that location, there was another note. Now, at this point, Condon is accompanied by Charles Lindbergh, who was packing heat. But Lindbergh decided to allow Dr. Condon to go alone because the note directed him to do so. So now Dr. Condon goes to meet the kidnapper, the man he knew is John. And he told John he would not hand over the money until they were told where the baby was located. So John goes, hang on a minute. And he basically left the meeting, comes back 10 minutes later with a note that he said provided the baby's precise location. So Dr. Condon then handed John the $50,000 in cash and gold certificates and was given the baby's location on this note. So John turns away, walks off into the sunset with all this money. So the note said Charles Jr. was being held 250 miles northwest of the Bronx and directed them to a boat named Nellie near Martha's Vineyard, which is in Massachusetts. Charles immediately flew to the location and met law enforcement, and they had already been scouring. They did a water search where they had boats going up and down harbors and marinas and looking for watercraft named Nellie. They did a land search, all this kind of stuff. But the search was unsuccessful, and it was repeated again and again, but they never found baby Charles. He was gone.
In mid-May of 1932, this is about 2.5 months after Charles Jr. was kidnapped, but about 6 weeks after the ransom money was exchanged for naught, by sheer happenstance, a trucker named William Allen stopped along the road just a couple of miles from the Lindbergh's home in East Amwell Township. As he looked out the passenger side window, protruding from the ground, he saw a baby's head and foot. It was Charles Lindbergh Jr. The baby was taken to the coroner, and it was revealed that Charles Jr.'s head was crushed. There was a hole in his skull, and some of his body parts were missing. And these were organs, not like an arm. And so, obviously, the assumption is it was an animal or something that got to it. The cause of death was listed as a massive skull fracture, and the coroner estimated that the little boy had been dead for about 2 months. Now, Kath, because this is right around the same time as the kidnapping, a lot of people speculated that, remember we talked about there was a broken ladder outside of the nursery window, and they were thinking, oh, did it break when this man was walking down? And because obviously it didn't break when he was going up. Did he have Charles Jr. in his arms? And they both crashed to the ground, and Charles Jr. died as a result of it.
What a nightmare. But that makes sense.
It absolutely makes sense. And as you were just saying, it took 4 days for them to get proof of life.
Right.
And it was a gray sleep suit. Was that because they had to go dig up the baby to get it? And that's why it was above the ground when the trucker went by.
And it took 4 days from the time they requested proof of life until the time the suit was presented. So they had to dig up the body, they had to wash the suit. I bet you anything.
Oh, I bet, yeah.
And then present it.
Right.
And so I bet you're right. I bet that's why it was a shabbily dug grave or a too shallow a grave.
Right, exactly.
That's, how awful.
So after Charles Lindbergh identified the body of his son, he and Anne left the house to stay at her parents' home in Englewood, New Jersey, which was about an hour north of them. Charles Jr.'s remains were cremated the following day, and his ashes were scattered at sea. His parents never spent another night in their house.
Throughout 1932 and 1933, the police focused on tracking the gold certificates the kidnapper had been given, but they didn't have any success. But in August of 1934, almost 2.5 years after Charles Jr. had been taken, a total of 16 gold certificates were discovered. And as each certificate was recovered, the FBI basically put a map on a wall and they put a colored pin at the location where each gold certificate was used. And these were recovered in the larger New York metropolitan area, and they were kind of all over. But then the location of these certificates became more concentrated in the mostly German-speaking district of Yorkville, which was in Upper Manhattan. So in September of 1934, a bank teller in the Bronx noticed a gold certificate with a series of numbers and letters penciled in the margin of the bill. So the teller notified investigators who tracked the certificate to a gas station in Upper Manhattan. So the attendant recalled an average-sized man with a German accent driving a blue Dodge had come in and paid for his gas with one of these certificates.
And Kathy, basically what happened was, and I love this gas station attendant, he would be doing a true crime podcast if he was around today. But basically, this guy comes in this Dodge and pays with this gold certificate. And the gas station attendant was like, wow, mister, we really don't see a lot of these anymore. These are super rare. And the guy was like, I got 100 of them at home. Made some off the cuff comment. And the gas station attendant's spidey sense went off. And he was like, okay, this is weird. This is not the kind of man who looks like he's got drawers full of gold certificates. So on the gold certificate, he wrote down the guy's license plate number. That was what the numbers and letters were that the bank teller saw.
$10 said this gas attendant thought it was some kind of fraud. And he's like, I'm going to write this down just in case it bounces, so to speak. I'm going to come find this guy.
Exactly.
He's going to owe me his $2.63 for that full tank of gas.
Exactly.
So the license plate number written on the bill was traced to Bruno Richard Hauptmann, a 34-year-old carpenter living in the Bronx who'd been in the United States for about 11 years. On the morning of September 19, 1934, so 2.5 years after Charles Lindbergh Jr. was taken from his family home, Bruno Hauptmann was arrested for kidnapping and murder. And in his possession was a $20 gold certificate. And when they searched his house, they found a pair of shoes, which had been purchased with another $20 gold certificate that they'd recovered 11 days prior. And so what the investigators were doing was they were figuring out where these things were cached, what was purchased, and how they could connect them to their arrestee. So on the night that Hauptmann was arrested, he was identified by the taxi driver who had delivered a ransom note to Dr. Condon. And he said, yep, that's the guy who gave me the handwritten note. Because, Kath, originally the FBI were thinking that maybe the taxi driver, the knock on the door,
could have been the killer.
Yes, could have been the kidnapper. Exactly. So the following day, gold certificates tied to the ransom through the serial numbers that they documented in excess of $13,000 were found in Hauptmann's garage.
And this is like $500,000 today.
That is crazy. Yeah. And he was also identified by Dr. Condon, the go-between. Dr. Condon was like, yep, that's the man I know as John.
And then, Kathy, here's the other thing that they found when they were going through Hauptmann's house. And I thought this was interesting. In the house, on the trim of a door jamb, they found a phone number written in pencil. It was Dr. Condon's phone number.
Ruh-roh.
Exactly. And they found a sawed-off piece of floorboard in Hauptmann's attic that they believed matched that broken homemade ladder that was found underneath the nursery window. Of course, Bruno Hauptmann was like, hey, I had nothing to do with taking this kid. And the gold certificates the detectives found actually belonged to a friend of mine who died. His name was Isidore Fish, and he left the box that was filled with money with him because Fish had to go to Germany, and he wanted me to make sure nothing happened to it. But while he was in Germany, he died, and, well, he owed me money anyway, so I just took it.
Do you have any idea if they tracked down this Fish guy?
You know what? I didn't see anywhere in the FBI files or anywhere else that they had tried to track the man down.
Interesting.
I think they just decided it was BS and didn't need to do it. Additional information showed that Hauptmann was a native of Saxony, Germany, which is in the eastern part of the country. And Kath, he actually had a criminal record there for robbery and had spent time in prison. Now, in July of 1923, he stowed away aboard a ship in Bremen, Germany. So this is northern Germany, and arrived in New York City in July of 1923. But because he'd stowed away, he got there and they're like, dude, get back on the ship. You going home?
Yeah. They're like, sayonara.
Exactly.
Or how do you say it?
Auf Wiedersehen.
There you go. I should have known that.
Or tschüss.
Bonjour.
Yeah. Anyways, Hauptmann goes back to Germany, but then was able to legally re-enter the U.S. just 5 months later. And then 3 years after he got to the U.S., he met and married his wife, Anna. Now, back in New York City, he worked as a carpenter, but Kath, investigators, of course, doing their deep dive as they need to, discovered that just a short time after the ransom was paid, Hauptmann began to trade extensively in stocks and never worked a day again. And then, we've talked in a couple of our recent episodes, especially Zodiac and Black Dahlia, about handwriting. Well, specimens of Hauptmann's handwriting were obtained and sent to Washington, D.C., where they were examined by the FBI lab, and a comparison of his handwriting with the handwriting of all the ransom notes showed what the FBI lab determined to be remarkable similarities. Not sure that would hold up today, but I will tell you, I saw pictures of these different notes compared with his handwriting. It was almost identical. It was like somebody traced over it.
I honestly think that your average individual could look and go, yep, that's so-and-so's. Yep, that's, you know what I mean? Like, okay, it's the T, it's the S, it's, whatever.
Exactly. Look how he dots
if they're
the
not
I.
doing ink analysis,
it doesn't count.
It's common sense.
Yeah. 2 weeks after his arrest, a New Jersey grand jury indicted Bruno Hauptmann for the kidnapping and murder of Charles Lindbergh Jr. Kath, he stood trial fewer than 3 months later.
That is fast.
Speedy Gonzales fast.
Yes. I have no idea how the defense prepared in 3 months.
So, as you can imagine, the first witness who was brought to the stand was the one who was going to tug at the heartstrings. Anne Lindbergh identified for the jury that the gray sleeping suit that was given to Dr. Condon as proof of life or proof of contact was in fact the one that they had put their baby boy to bed in the night that he was kidnapped. And then after Anne, Charles Lindbergh also took the stand, testifying in the same mournful fashion that his wife had testified. And Kath, what he spoke a lot about was the contact with the ransom notes, playing bodyguard to Dr. Condon.
Right. I am sure that this jury was totally starstruck.
Oh, I'm sure.
I mean, at this time, it was an all-male jury.
Well, why would you let women... They had work to do at home.
You know how women are.
I know.
They don't deserve to be on a jury.
They're just going to mess it all up. Come on.
Oh my gosh. We amuse ourselves so much. It's unbelievable.
And hope you're amused too. But the star witness, of course, Kathy, was Dr. John Condon, because he was obviously the only person who met with the kidnapper face to face. And it was, this big dramatic courtroom drumroll moment when the prosecutor said, Dr. Condon, do you recognize the kidnapper as being in this room with us? And he dramatically pointed his finger over to the defendant and said, that man I know is John. And I'm totally paraphrasing.
Right, exactly.
The big star of the show, though, really wasn't Dr. John Condon. Kath, it was the handwriting analysis. They didn't call 1 or 2 or 3 handwriting experts. They called 8. I'm calling overkill.
Totally.
And each one of them got up and pretty much said the exact same thing. Kathy, they testified. These 8 people testified about 45 different documents.
I'm surprised. I mean, the only reason the judge probably allowed it is because it's not each of the experts affirming the other expert's opinion.
Correct.
It was, this is what I was given, and this is what I was given, and this was what so all these different aspects of the analysis came out, but it's a prosecution's way of being like, look at all these people we have on our side.
Exactly. We're so cool. So this was the best part, though, Kath, for me. The final person who was the witness for the prosecution was someone who they referred to as a wood expert who worked for the U.S. Forest Service. I didn't realize I had them.
I was just going to make a really naughty joke, but I won't.
Okay, say it and I'll delete it. I'll delete it, I promise.
I was going to say, I bet a lot of men think they're wood experts.
Basically, Kath, what they said is that the wood in the ladder came from a local lumber store in the Bronx, and then based on the location and shape of the nail holes and the grain of the wood and blah, 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 the expert asserted that this board was at one time joined to a board that they found in Hauptmann's attic. With the wood in the attic connected to the broken ladder, the prosecution rested.
The defendant, Bruno Hauptmann, took the stand in his own defense, and he was actually on the stand for 2 days. He completely denied any connection to the kidnapping, the baby, the ransom notes, meeting with Dr. Condon, any of that stuff. And when he talked about the ladder, he said, look, all of these houses in the Bronx were built around the same time. They have the same wood. This is nothing. This is not important. But he stuck to his story vehemently that it was his friend Isidore Fish who gave him these gold certificates to hang on to while he went back to Germany. And he had an alibi. He said that he worked all day as a carpenter at a building site and then picked up his wife from work and had dinner at a restaurant in the Bronx. However, the waiter and the owner of the restaurant had no recollection of Hauptmann and his wife being there, and they had nothing to prove they paid for their meal. The defense did have alibi witnesses come forward, including his wife, Anna, saying, yes, we went to dinner. Yes, we were working, But on cross-examination, there were holes poked in their testimony. For example, he said he was working. One of the witnesses was like, I don't remember exactly what time I saw him at work, this kind of thing. So there was not a clear and fluid, definitive presentation of a solid alibi. One of the tactical errors that Hauptmann's defense attorney made was promising that he too would bring 8 handwriting experts to the stand to prove that his client's handwriting did not match the ransom notes. But he only brought 1 expert to the stand. And the jury remembered that. After a 45-day trial with 162 witnesses, the jury deliberations began. 11 hours later, Bruno Hauptmann was found guilty of first-degree murder and condemned to death. Appeals were swiftly rejected, and law enforcement still attempted to gain a confession from him, but never did. And Bruno Hauptmann went to the electric chair on April 3rd, 1936.
And Kathy, what's interesting? So 90 years later, looking back on what happened with a modern lens, there is a group of people who actually believe that Bruno Hauptmann was incorrectly arrested, convicted, and executed. They think that it was Charles and/or Anne Lindbergh who accidentally killed baby Charles, and they needed a scapegoat for the crime. Hauptmann was an immigrant. He was poor. He was a day laborer. He had a background of, scuffles with the law, and he was a patsy.
None of that makes sense at all, especially because Lindbergh and his wife wanted privacy. They didn't want to thrust themselves into the limelight. So
but if it was an accidental murder, though, what are they going to do?
It's not a murder if it's accidental.
Oh.
It could be an accidental homicide, but
What if they accidentally killed the baby?
Yeah.
Are they still going to want that to be? That would sully their famous reputation.
yeah, but so would this whole ridiculousness of involving the FBI. This is the front page story for months.
I agree with you.
Yeah, no, it sounds
absolutely do.
ludicrous.
But you know, you always get those conspiracy theories that come out.
I know, but that's also,
Like
you know,
people
whatever.
think the Earth is round. Kath, I also came across the fact that during the time Charles and Anne Lindbergh were dealing with the stress and trauma of the kidnapping and death of their firstborn, Anne was actually pregnant. And just 3 months after Charles Jr.'s body was found, she gave birth to another baby boy they named John. Over the next 13 years, they added 2 more sons and 2 daughters to the family.
I cannot imagine the emotions that poor couple went through. You know, it's joy, but it's bittersweet. Like the worst thing possible is losing a child, and then you lose one this way.
Yeah.
Oh, and then you're kept on the ropes thinking the baby's still alive.
Yeah.
That is, I can't possibly imagine.
By the time Bruno Hauptmann was found guilty and sent to the electric chair, the Lindberghs had been harassed for 3 years by reporters and the public hysteria surrounding it. Kath, they had also received fake kidnapping threats for their other children and demands for money. And so to escape this ongoing intrusion into their lives, 7 months after the conviction, the Lindberghs moved to England.
Who could blame them?
Yeah, no kidding.
I mean, talk about terror for your other kids.
In the years and decades following their move abroad, Anne became a best-selling author, mostly poems and
Nonfiction, I think.
and nonfiction. And Charles actually went on to make contributions to rocketry, anthropology, conservation, all of that. Charles Lindbergh died from cancer on the Hawaiian island of Maui in 1974. He was diagnosed with lymphoma when it was terminal, and he chose not to undergo any further treatment, and so he decided to live the rest of his life at his home on Maui because of the area's privacy and beauty. And I'll be honest with you, Maui is my favorite Hawaiian island.
I've never been to Maui. I've been to Oahu and Kauai.
I've been to Maui and Kauai.
Kauai is beautiful.
I like Maui.
Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah.
You and your Maui Wowie.
Okay, next trip we take, we go to Maui, and then we'll settle it.
There you go.
But I've never been to Oahu, so maybe we need to do both. Anyway, so his wife, Anne, and one of his sons were by his side when he died. Per his wishes, he was buried at a church cemetery overlooking the Pacific Ocean. After Charles's death, Anne Lindbergh actually lived another 27 years. She continued to write following his death and was actually presented with numerous honorary degrees, including Smith College, which was her alma mater. It's where she got her bachelor's degree, and Amherst College. And Kath, she was inducted into the National Women's Hall of Fame and the National Aviation Hall of Fame.
What a stud.
She was totally studly. She passed away in 2001 at the age of 94 at her daughter's home in Vermont.
2 years after Anne's death, Charles was in the news again. Just 2 years after Anne died, Charles Lindbergh was in the news again. So this is now the summer of 2003, which is 30 years after Charles' death. 3 German siblings came forward and broke the news that Charles Lindbergh was their father. So turns out, in 1957, Charles Lindbergh, who was then 55, met and fell in love with Brigitte Hesheimer. Did I say that right?
You did.
Okay, thank you. And now she was a 31-year-old hat maker living in Munich, Germany, and they began a long-term affair that only ended with his death in 1974. Brigitte and Charles kept their relationship secret, even from their own children, Dirk, Astrid, and David. Charles would visit Brigitte several times a year, but his children only knew him as Mr. Carew Kent, who was a friend of their mother's. That's what they thought. So at the same time that this affair is happening, Charles was also involved in a secret long-term relationship with Brigitte's sister, Marietta.
I'm guessing the women weren't close.
I would hope not, actually.
Or they probably weren't after this came out.
Yes, exactly. There was also a third woman named Valeska who was also involved with Charles Lindbergh, and she was his German translator and private secretary. So Charles Lindbergh was reported to have 3 children with Brigitte, as we said, 2 children with Marietta, and 2 children with Valeska. All 3 of the women kept secret the identity of who their father was. Charles Lindbergh provided homes for his other families in Germany and Switzerland and visited them regularly, apparently taking enormous care that his alter ego remained secret. And so all of his European children were told that their father was a famous American writer named Carew Kent, who was on a secret mission that they must never divulge.
CIA. You know that's probably what was intimated,
Yes.
if not said outright.
Totally. And all the children were born between 1958 and 1967. So 10 days before Charles Lindbergh died in 1974, he wrote letters to his 3 mistresses asking them to continue the utmost secrecy, which they did. Now, Astrid, who was one of the 3 children by Brigida, confronted her mother in the 1990s and basically was like, who's my dad? Who's my dad? Who's my dad? And when she learned the truth of her father's identity, she was sworn to secrecy and kept the secret until Brigida's death in 2001. The other 2 families have continued their silence and have not given any interviews. But DNA analysis later confirmed Astrid's claim. And Brigida's children spoke publicly about Charles' visits, describing him as making them pancakes, taking to the park, etc., etc. They had very positive memories of Charles Lindbergh. One of his sons said, "We were always happy when he came. He really gave us the feeling he was there for us."
Well, because he was the fun dad.
He was the fun dad, yeah. So Reeve Lindbergh, the youngest of Charles and Anne's children, wrote about these revelations of her father's infidelity and about her connecting with her European brothers and sisters. And she wrote about this in an essay which was published in 2009. She said, "I have the feeling that he was the only person involved with all these families who knew the full truth. And I keep thinking that by the time he died in 1974, my father had made his life so complicated that he had to keep each part separate from the other parts. I don't know why he lived this way, and I don't think I will ever know, but what it means to me is that every intimate human connection my father had during his later years was fractured by secrecy."
Thank you all for listening. Thank you for continued prayers for Matt.
Yep. And we're going to do our best to give new episodes, assuming my brother's condition permits.
And otherwise, you might see a rerun or 2. But we know you understand and support what we're doing.